So welcome to the Wildlife Trust tent here at Groundswell, the Regenerative Farming Festival. And it's a packed tent, I'm pleased to say, standing room only, crouching room only, right at the front as well here. And people queuing up outside, of course, for this amazing session where we're going to be asking the question, are you beaver ready? We want to ask the question, how the return of beavers can boost your farm resilience. And we have a fantastic panel of people that are here to help us answer this question. We have Hilary McGrady, who is, of course, Director General of the National Trust. We have Gerhard Schwab, who's Conservationist in continental Europe with a lot of experience of beavers there. We have our very own Angelika von Heimendahl, who's Beaver Reintroduction Manager at the Wildlife Trust. Isn't that a great job title? And then we also have Richard Allan, who's a farmer and conservationist with experience of this as well. So please give a warm welcome to our wonderful panel. Now, of course, there are lots of reasons why we could be very, very excited about the return of beavers, a native species, to the British Isles. It could be, and my team would really prefer me not to say this, but it could be for me to point out that they are the fluffiest animals in Britain, with, get this, a density of 23,000 hairs per centimetre on their chest. Isn't that pretty amazing? Absolutely astonishing. But of course, it's not that at all, really. The big thing is that beavers are a keystone species. They play a unique role in creating habitats. And when you reflect on the fact that we've lost around 90% of our wetlands in this country, and they are one species that can create new wetlands for free, then you realise just how important beavers are. But of course, they're also hugely important, not just for nature recovery, but also for natural flood management and providing a boost to the rural economy. You know, it's been talked about a little bit in the debate about beavers the last few years. Oh, will it cause for farmland to be flooded? And yeah, that's an issue. But I would also ask the question that how many farms have been flooded in recent decades because of the absence of beavers in this country and not holding the water upstream? So there's a lot to think about there. But we at the Wildlife Trust long thought that there's a real overall benefit in returning beavers, and I'm pleased to say that the government has now recognised this. As you know, earlier this year announced that they would be putting a licensing regime in place to allow the return of beavers to the wild. And that's really exciting. But look, that's not to say it's not without a few challenges here and there. It won't be plain sailing. Issues do arise, and we need a sensible way to deal with them as they do so, and so that we can really harness the benefits of these incredible species. And central to this is, of course, ensuring that beavers have a positive impact in the farmed landscape. So that's the issue that our panel is going to help us really deal with this afternoon. And I'll come straight to you, Hilary. National Trust has been playing a really important lead role in helping with this reintroduction. Tell us a little bit, Hilary, about your ambitions at the National Trust for the beavers' return, what practically you've been doing, and how it's going so far.
So thank you, and absolutely brilliant to be here. And not surprised so many people are here, actually. Beavers, yeah, you're right. The furry thing is important, but actually it's amazing just how important beavers are as a means of engaging the public. And you're just one example of that. But just hold that thought, because it is really important. So the National Trust, like Wildlife Trust and many other organisations, absolutely have had a really long-term ambition to return beavers to our landscapes. And we have been working in partnership with many, many people to get to the point that we had our first legal release at Purbeck just earlier this year, which is a huge achievement, actually. But not surprising that we eventually got there to some degree, because the amount of work that has gone in to get us to a place where people could feel confident enough to be able to go to wild release. Clearly, there are a lot of beavers out there already, but it was a moment in time. And I think there were a couple of reasons why we got to that point. The first was that we did put a huge amount of effort into engaging with the people who were likely to be impacted by this. So the local community in the round, farmers, landowners, people in the local area. I think we had over 60 different individual conversations with different landowners, really listening to them really carefully about their very valid concerns, actually. That started in 2019, so a long time ago, and very much coming from what are your concerns and how can we mitigate those concerns. So that was one thing. Second was about where we chose to focus on. Purbeck was the ideal location. not very close to very many people, a super national nature reserve, so it had all of the ingredients for a space for the beavers to thrive, because we have had some other places that have not been as brilliant for that. And obviously we have had a team of people who have been able to support the beavers, not track them necessarily, because they don't like being tracked, we've discovered, but certainly making sure that we are keeping an eye on all of the things that people may have been concerned about and being able to respond to it. So I think we have had the ingredients that we've built over time, and it is super important to engage people in the process. And the final bit that I think we did incredibly well was actually at the launch itself, and we had Mary Cray there, and we had a number of other people, but we really did a big exercise around engaging the public in this really quite momentous moment. And I think to date we've had about 5 million views of the release. So again, just to point to that, why this is important is about engaging the people out there to say why nature matters and what are all the connected stories with this. So yeah, great so far.
Well, and why do you think it is, Hilary? Why? I just want to push you a little bit. Why is it? What is it about beavers, do you think, that people find so amazing?
So I'm not being funny about it. There is the kind of furry, this is a really cute furry species, let's be honest. There is that, which, as a real basic entry point, should not be underestimated, actually. It's really good. You can build a lovely story around that. I think there is a novelty factor. Clearly, this is this is unusual. We're stepping into something that's different, and there's been so many debates around it that it feels such a positive thing. I think that's really important, particularly at the minute. People are looking for something that is a story of joy, and this is a story of joy, I have to say. But there's also a little bit of jeopardy around it, actually. People are curious to see how it's going to go. So it's been ingredients across all of the things. And then the very, very important actual real stories behind it, which is why wetlands matter, why this is helping prevent flooding, all of those really sound economic stories that you also need to underpin those sort of slightly higher level enjoyment stories. So it's a mixture. You need to get the balance.
Brilliant. Well, Hilary, thank you so much for kicking us off with such a lovely story from the National Trust, what's been happening there. And, this real sense of positivity. We often talk about shrinking baseline syndrome, the idea that, any of us alive today, we think about nature and we imagine it in a good, better state when we were kids or whatever. What excites me so much by the story, this is rising baseline syndrome. Actually, we're starting to increase our sense of the nature that can be in the British Isles, which is really exciting. And that leads us nicely to you, Gerhard, because actually across continental Europe, there has been this big story of sort of beavers coming back and increasing. Of course, they never disappeared completely, but nonetheless, we've seen this increase in beaver numbers across continental Europe in recent years. Can you tell us a little bit about that and tell us how that is working alongside farming?
Well, the beaver was almost extinct. We had about 1,000 to 2,000 animals left in all of Eurasia, from Spain to Siberia. The first releases started in 1920, 1930 in Russia, in the Scandinavian states, in Balticum, mainly for game reason, to produce the pellets. And it's just too difficult to raise beavers in captivity. You have to keep the families separate. You have to raise them for 2 years. Costs a lot of money. So the idea was, kick him out, let him grow, and if you got enough, harvest. Very smart idea. But then World War II came, and nobody was interested in beaver harvesting. And the populations grew. And then in the 60s, 70s, at the beginning of nature conservation, Rachel Carson, her book, Silent Spring, when everybody thought about we have to restore nature, beavers were brought back just as a goodwill, because we got them extinct, we have to bring them back. So the beavers were released, and nobody thought about what they could do. Because we didn't have beavers, so nobody saw what they could do. You bring back the beavers, let's bring back some to Bavaria, to the Oxbows along the Danube, and might be in the long run we're going to have a couple of hundred beavers in Germany and in Bavaria. And then we saw what the beaver does to biodiversity, to water retention, to flooding protection. So in 90s, 2000s, a lot of countries wanted to have the beaver, not to have the beaver as species back, but to have the beaver as the helper to restore habitats, to recreate biodiversity, to store water during flooding, to store water for dry seasons. And that was, to be honest, the best time of my life as biologist, when we moved around 1,000 beavers to Croatia, to Belgium, to Hungary, to Romania, to Bosnia, to Herzegovina, and to Spain, with the result, out of the 1,000 beavers, we got other countries covered, from Croatia to Slovenia, from Slovenia to Austria, and from Austria to Italy. So the beavers in Italy are coming from original Bavarian beavers. And that was the idea, to have the beaver back for benefits, not only for humans, but mainly for biodiversity. When the beaver came to Bavaria, it was very good in the first years, but then the beaver moved out of the floodplains into arable land. And in arable land, the beaver did what it's been doing for 50 million years, creating the landscape as he needs it. So if there's not enough water in the creek, build a dam. If there's a dam, you get flooded areas. You get willows growing. You get species coming. You create your own food, which is great for beavers, for biodiversity. It's not so great if it's on your field. So the beaver is great for all of us. The problem is it's single people who own property along the creek. They have the problems. And that's why I developed in Bavaria the beaver management, how to help the people, not because we are so smart in Bavaria. The only reason beaver management developed in Bavaria, we were the first country who had a large number of beavers on private areas. We also had lots of beavers in East Germany. They were also flooding farmland. But in East Germany, it was state land. And the guy operating the farm, well, if there's a beaver and he flooded 3 hectares, so what? I just don't plow it. Who cares? That was completely different in Germany. So we developed beaver management, how to deal with the beaver, how to help the farmers, how you can solve a problem. You can put up electric fence, all the things you can do. We go out and tell the farmers what to do. And our experience is a lot of the beaver problems are no problem. They are problems because you don't know what to do. If you're afraid that the beaver eats your fish, it's a huge problem. If you know the beaver does not eat your fish, but the tree that's been laying in the water, in the creek, because cut by a beaver, that's a place where fish can hide. It's a completely different opinion you have again for beavers. And that's what we still are doing. We are teaching a lot. We are doing field trips. And together with Derek Go from Devon, I had a couple of hundred farmers, nature conservation people in Bavaria the last 15 years. We go to farmers, we go to water management, we go to mayors and ask them, they ask them though, because they know I would only say the nice things about beavers. They ask them and what they can do, and that's how they learn. If the beaver comes, we have to learn a little bit, but it's not the final end of farming.
Great, thank you very much. I love it. You're telling us how do you solve a problem like the beaver. It's fantastic. Thank you very much. Angelika, let's turn to you then. And you're looking right across, obviously huge amounts of work going on across the Wildlife Trust about trying to return beavers, and you're trying to coordinate it and build it up into something. Tell us about how we at the Wildlife Trust, about the learning we've had from some of the sites where we have had beavers back, and where we look to then take that next.
Yes, so the Wildlife Trust has been involved with beavers for a long time, and one of the most famous sites is the River Otter. Very unfortunate that the beaver went to the River Otter, but this is what happened. And the River Otter has had beavers for almost 20 years, and so we have quite a lot of experience with wild beavers. Although in most of England at the moment we only had legal releases into enclosures. And this is the big changes we've had now in the last few months that we have benefited. First of all, we have a license to release beavers into the wild, but also we can release beavers from enclosures. And this will be the end of the enclosure time in England, which I think is really good news. The Wildlife Trust has worked on beavers continuously. We developed a beaver vision last year and published it, and I'm really glad to say that some of the things we asked for, like legalizing all the released beavers, which there are many hundreds in England, so they are all now legally there and they are fully protected. We're also working in Wales, and we're hoping that in Wales the law will change and the beaver will become a native species very soon. And the really new thing where the National Trust has already been successful, Natural England have developed a system where we have expressions of interest. And the deadline for those was on the 2nd of May. And there have been 40 expressions of interest, and 20 of those came from the Wildlife Trust. And it's a slightly strange system because there's never been a system where you had to express an interest before you were allowed to progress to a license application. So it's almost like you have to apply to get into the waiting room, and then you're allowed to apply for the license. But anyway, we have. So 20 of the applications have come from Wildlife Trusts, and really it's as far from Cumbria to Kent and from Northumberland to Cornwall. So hopefully we'll have lots and lots of beaver projects all over England, because at the moment most of the beavers are sort of between Kent and Cornwall, so more in the south of the country. And I think if we're looking at places like Bavaria, where they've had beavers for longer, we really need to have beavers in all the catchments, and also we need to learn to live with beavers. And I think this is something that's just come across from Gerhard as well, is that once you have beavers, you see how they live, how they build, and what you can do. And one of the things we want to do as a wildlife trust is really to support farmers to live with beavers. So when we really don't want to have the situation where we feel we're on different sides of the equation, and we need to move forward and make the government find systems to support the people that store water in the landscape. And of course there are individual places where that can lead to losses, and those have to be compensated or incentivized. And in that way, as a country, we can move forward to normalize beavers and to really have them as a wonderful species in our country.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angelika. And it's worth saying, isn't it, we are currently working on a briefing, a discussion document about the kind of measures that the government could put in place in sustainable farming incentive to kind of essentially reward farmers, support farmers for having beavers on their land. We hope to publish that soon and hope it will start that discussion about the kind of policy mechanisms that will enable farmers to live with beavers and to do well from that. But we can go now, I'm delighted to say, to a farmer that is living with beavers already. Richard, tell us about your farm, where it is, and what it's like living with beavers.
Sure. Hi everyone. Richard Allan. I live in West Wiltshire. We have a small family livestock farm down on the River Avon, where the Semington Brook flows into the Avon off Salisbury Plain. And we're on pretty flat ground, which traditionally was wonderful pasture land. But crucially, we spent quite a lot of time planting trees. And although my first passion is farming, my second passion was trees. And then latterly, much later, I have become enthusiastic about beavers. But my job here, I think, is to articulate the view as somebody who was farming quite happily, farming with trees. We have about 7-8 acres of orchard very close to the river, and beavers turn up. And we didn't ask the beavers to turn up. I mean, everyone else on this panel is a beaver enthusiast. I'm guessing most people in this room are beaver enthusiasts. But our job was to learn to live with them when they first turned up. And that process was a little bit like going through the 7 phases of grief. So initially there's this extraordinary sense of, wow, we've got wild beavers on our land. And if you travel to exotic places, you would have seen a scale of wildlife overseas that we have lost in this country for millennia. And we all pay a lot of money to go and see large animals and exciting landscapes overseas, but it's not something we're used to in our own country. And the first time you see a wild beaver towing a 30-foot log that is just cut down the River Avon between Bath and Melksham, it just blows your mind. It is just an extraordinary moment. So that first log, the first photograph of my wife with an ash tree that had been felled, a sort of 30, 40-year-old ash tree that had been felled, that was the pure excitement. What then follows was a mix of concern for the beavers, because they were not an authorised wild release. They were They've been there for quite a long time. By the time we found them in December 2022, they'd been in the area for at least 6 months and developed quite established bankside lodges. But we were concerned for them. We knew that they were, at that time, not a lawful wild animal in this country. And so we're concerned about conceding their presence from the powers that be to the extent that that is lawful. And we also then started to worry considerably about our trees. And I think if you look at the range of emotions around beavers in our country, at one end of the spectrum, I'll not name any large farming organisations of which I am a member, but do not speak for me. There is a lot of fear about beavers. And you get phrases like the right beaver in the right catchment area, or the right beaver in the right catchment area at the right farm. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a lot of people who are incredibly enthusiastic because beavers have so much to offer for restoring wildlife connectivity in our country. But in the middle are people like in December 2022, where beavers arrive unannounced on your land. They're going to impact the way you make a living. They will fell some of your trees. And emotionally, how does that feel? And where we've ended up is two messages I'd give you. One is, it's going to be fine. Don't panic. The other is that actually the long-term impact of beavers on us and our farm is it changed the way we look at the land. The biggest threat to our farm, standing here today, is water stress. We're a livestock farm. We graze grass, we grow grass, we have a lot of innovative ways of doing that, and we're organic, and we grow trees, we grow top fruit. But the biggest problem we face is water stress. And I think we've come to the realization that the biggest problem the beavers face is also water stress. They rectify that by where we are living in a nice big river they don't have to dam and grazing browsing our riparian trees. We have to rectify that by changing 200 years worth of farming mentality. And just the way my father thought, my grandfather thought, my great-grandfather thought, it just doesn't work anymore. So the realization for us is that we need to do stuff on the farm to keep water on the land. And funnily enough, we have an almost perfect coincidence of interest of the beaver and us. So for us, the beavers arriving on our land was really more of a tipping point in the way we thought about the land and where we thought about our farming. It's been a benign process. It will be harder for people higher up in the catchment when beavers start damming, as Gerhard was talking about. But all of those are surmountable difficulties and pale into insignificance when compared to water stress. That's our biggest problem.
Brilliant. Richard, thank you very much. And can you say a little bit more about how your neighbours have taken to this as well? What's the sort of variety of opinion in the wider catchment?
Yeah, so this is very anecdotal. We live in a small community. The community of Wadden, where I live, has 12 houses, and that is exactly the same number of houses there were in the Doomsday Book. Different people, different houses, but pretty much the same configuration. There are also 4 farms that border on that land. We're one. I'd put us in the pro-beaver camp. Of the other 3 farmers, one is pro-beaver, one is completely agnostic, doesn't really care as long as they don't affect him. And one we had a degree of conflict where he destroyed a bankside lodge accidentally, as the police determined. I wasn't involved in the process, but there was a degree of conflict. I think the police dealt with it very, very well. I know his grandmother told him off, and I suspect that that issue will not reoccur. But it does illustrate the challenge of farmers that have been brought up in a paradigm where all farms are tidy now, not like they were 100 years ago. My grandfather would not recognise the way we farm today. Everything is tidied up. So those bits of scrub down by the river, of course he put a topper through them because he wanted it tidy so he could get a cut of hay off it. So there is a give. There's a legitimate confusion in farmers that have been told to do something by the vast majority of well-meaning people. But the price to them is surrendering land which otherwise keep their head above water. And that's the thing we need to fix. In terms of the other people in the village, we have 12 domiciles, 12 houses, each with families of varying size, 2 workplaces. Of those, I think 6 are now rabidly pro-beaver and are going out, watching the beaver, taking cameras of the beaver. Our neighbour sends me pictures when the beaver comes every evening at 8 o'clock to nibble the willows at the bottom of his garden. But that I've never seen a community get so engaged with wildlife, a very ordinary community in the middle of Shire, England. And it is quite extraordinary how it's motivated people in ways, as I say, as I've never seen with wildlife before.
Amazing. And that was our experience with the River Otter in Devon as well, wasn't it? Overwhelming, big positive support from the local community.
Yes, because the River Otter gave the possibility of closing the doors, so they could have caught all the beavers, put them in enclosures or zoological collections or something, and then there was a movement within the community to keep the otters out in the wild, and they won eventually.
Keep the beavers out in the wild. Beavers out in the wild, in the River Otter. Yeah.
So the beavers out, and they have become a really big attraction. So the whole community has many more restaurants, bed and breakfast, and it's a real ecotourism destination.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, panel, for warming us up and demonstrating ourselves as beaver believers. So, let's go for questions, please. Who's got questions? Who's got the mic? Okay, let's go straight to... We'll go to Izzy in the front row and then the gentleman behind her. Maybe you can say who you are.
I'm Isabella Tree. I'm from NEP Rewilding Project in Sussex. I'd love to hear more from Gerhard about how you mitigate farmer-beaver tensions in Bavaria, because it seems to have been so astonishing, the positivity that's come out of that system. And is there something we can learn here in the UK as we finally, after decades, release beavers into the wild again?
Is it all right? I think there's going to be a lot of questions, so I might take 3 in a go, if that's right. If the panel can just try and remember them and answer the ones you want. So the gentleman behind, I can see there's a lot of interest. So, yes, Stephen.
Hi.
And just say who you are, please. Or whatever.
My name's Stephen Bailey. I own a farm in Western Hampshire between Rockbourne and Sandal Heath. I have a chalk stream going down it. I have water meadows. I have lots of willow. A perfect... place for, and I've of course been a great admirer of Isabella's leadership in terms of rewilding. So as soon as I heard that wild beaver releases were going to be allowed, I applied for an expression of interest form. And National Trust had 5 years and billions of pounds to spend on it. I'm on my own. And the amount of stuff I had to read, I just couldn't do it. But I filled out the form as best I could, a little bit slapdash. Of course, Natural England just came back and said no. But they said, you're the only person on the Hampshire Avon to have applied to do the Hampshire Avon. And we need someone who will accommodate the whole thing. So I reapplied and said I'd do the whole lot. And if there are any farmers who objected, they could come and see me and I'd talk to them. But I haven't heard back from that. So my question is there someone at the Wildlife Trust who would fill out the forms for me? Because I'm too old for it. I really don't want to fill out these forms.
Right, we'll get to that question in a minute, and I know there's some people in the audience might want to think carefully how they respond to that. But anyway, maybe colleagues from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. And then there's one more question. We'll go to Jake, and then, because you're here with the mic, and then we'll go to another bit of the room.
I'm currently dealing with...
And say who you are, sorry.
So, Jake Vines, Holcombe Estate, North Norfolk. We have 3 chalk streams on the estate. And an expression of interest was put in. And there's been a bit of a landowner-farmer backlash because stakeholder engagement just didn't happen. And I'm having to deal with that. So I'm just interested in the Bavarian model, on how we, where I'm also, North Norfolk is very close to one of the largest drainage systems in Western Europe, and how we manage beavers in that, the fens primarily. So the stakeholder engagement is really important. I think there's been some failings in that, in the expression of interest, and I just know how we can progress going forward to working with some of these landowners.
Great. Thank you very much for those 3 questions. And have a think in the audience if you want to ask a question next, and we'll try and come to you. So, Gerhard, there's at least a couple there right for you.
About what do we do for farmers? The simplest is if they have a damage, they get damage compensation. Rather simple, so not a lot of work, not many pages to fill out. It's just your name, what was the damage, how big is the damage. A local consultant has to sign it's been a beaver damage, nothing else. That's it. He can get electric fencing for free for against damage in crops. He get consultation on, for example, land exchange. So he gets land further away from the river. The land next to the river then goes to the state or to the NGO. So there are a lot of different possibilities. One very important thing is consulting. Because a lot of farmers come, we have a beaver, and I don't know what he does, I don't know what to do. And some of them, my best meeting I ever had, I saw a motorbike standing at his place and asked whether he would sell it to me. Then we spent 1 hour talking about motorbikes, and then he wanted to leave it. We have to do the beaver problem. Forget about the beaver. So very often it's a problem, but not a real one, but it's somebody, the damn animal. But it's talking to the farmers. The stakeholders, there was one big advantage when beavers were released in Bavaria, there were no stakeholders. Nobody said anything about farmers, about anybody. It was a decision by the Ministry of Agriculture together with the NGO, we release beavers. Nobody asked nobody. Of course, now it's necessary, if you have beavers, if you have any other species that might impact somebody, you talk to him before you do it. And if you have problems, you talk with them. You don't go on that, we do this, we do this, we do this. It's very easy to find the solutions on the desk, but the people living in the field, they have to accept it. You have to make the solution together with him. You can do this, 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 and this. What would you want to do? What could you do? It takes longer than just to do it, but then in the long run, everybody will be not very happy, but he will say, okay, we got the beaver, we got problems, but we can solve them.
Great, thank you. And Hilary, that you talked about the importance of stakeholder engagement in your opening comments. What for you makes kind of good stakeholder engagement and less good stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical, I have to say, because people need to feel as if they've been heard. It almost doesn't matter what the response is, but they want to know that they've been heard. I do think there's a massive role in demonstrating the reality of the situation, so that's why Perbic is actually really important, to get people to come down to say this is the reality of it. I think that's why, while the enclosures have been hugely frustrating, we have learnt lots of lessons out of enclosures. We have 3 sites, and our teams have learnt loads of things as to what works and what doesn't work, what things to look out for and so on. So I think there is something about the community, and I know there are lots of people here, really banding together to really help build confidence with those stakeholders who have legitimate concerns, actually, but to be able to point to it and say, this is what will happen, and here's what will happen if something goes wrong. Because I think Gerhard and I, we spoke, there are sometimes when things go wrong, and we have to acknowledge that and be able to respond to it. But demonstration, just like many things, that's why NEP and other places are so important, that you can go and see the difference that it's making, so it isn't a theoretical exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Angelika, let me come to you. This gentleman's question about getting application in Hampshire. As the Wildlife Trust, I don't think we can promise that we're always going to help people fill in the forms, but I think we can promise we'll always want to hear from people that are interested in putting applications. Is that right?
Yes, and can I just very quickly say something about stakeholders? I think we have a lot of experience with stakeholders. We're developing templates, how to engage about beavers. So I think if you talk to the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, we will be able to... stakeholder engagements always take time, and they can be quite expensive, but the more you streamline them and you know how to answer the questions and how to listen to people and voice their concerns, and many of the concerns may not be a real worry. And if you can answer them in a qualified way, then that really goes a long way. And the other one I would say is that we've had quite a lot of EOIs that have been partnerships. So rather than you saying, I would like some beavers on my farm, you would partner with other people in your catchment, in your... Yes, but maybe if we can all get together, and Hampshire is a very active wildlife trust and they're very interested in beavers. So if you can get other people on board, then your application will look much more complete. It will tick all the boxes, and you know the likelihood of being successful.
Sorry, we can't hear you. They won't be able to hear you online without a microphone.
And the other one is to be perseverance. Don't give up.
Perseverance. Absolutely. All right, thank you very much. Let's take some more questions, please. Let's just see with... so I think we've got a bunch over here, Will, if you're happy to migrate over here. Let's go to Chris first, who's a gentleman in the second row, and then the guy in front of him, and, well, then the guy behind as well. We might as well do three in a go there. Yeah, go for it, Chris, and please say who you are.
Thanks. Christopher Price from RBST, but previously with CLA. And
RBS is Rare Breed
Survival Trust, yes. Yeah. 7 or 8 years ago with CLA, I went with Derek to go and see Gerhard and how they managed beavers in Bavaria. And the main takeaway was that you had a really comprehensive network of advice that landowners could take advantage of. If you had a problem with a beaver, you could phone up you or one of your guys and find out what to do about it. So you had that degree of reassurance, which meant you could do something rather than just going for lethal control, which is what most farmers who've got a problem will be inclined to do. Could you say a bit about how that works in practice and whether that could be rolled out in England and maybe whether it's something the Wildlife Trust could do?
Okay, thanks. Hold on to that. Okay, well, if you go back, well, come to you in a minute, Callum. Yeah, and Jen behind, if you can say.
Thanks, Nick Sanford. Work for the Royal Countryside Fund, but I'm really speaking on behalf of the Royal Forestry Society. I was slightly sad that you started off with the fluffy factor on beavers, because fluffy factor may be attractive to lots of people, but it doesn't always have the best outcome. And we have various fluffy things like grey squirrels, muntjac deer, everything else, which are enormous problems, and we'll be aware of that. But my concern, which follows on from the previous question, is woodland beside rivers and areas. I mean, there's a lot of valuable trees grown in that area, and I've seen enclosed beavers. I've seen what a fantastic job they do for flood prevention, etc. But I've also seen how very quickly they can destroy young trees, small trees, etc. And I was just wondering about how you manage a situation where you have beavers in a wooded area, and a wooded area that is being run partly for nature but partly for commercial purposes as well. You've got to remember that people invest a lot of money in some of these plantations.
Yeah.
So
thanks so much. And then to Callum in the front row.
Hi, yes, I'm Callum Evans. I'm an elm officer with the Forestry Commission, but also a sort of currently not practicing peatland researcher as well. I'd like to put that in because that's important to me. I feel like a lot of the questions around beaver actually sort of demonstrate to me that I'm wondering if people agree and how they feel about it as a sort of large-scale demonstration of conflicts with nature and sort of how that can be pushed forward in future. You know, Nick mentioned the muntjac deer and things like this, and people's issues with perhaps beavers, and maybe when they're getting more out of control. If people are having problems for introducing predators, a lot of the time people have issues with that because all of the reasons you can think. But I feel like the beaver and the way it conflicts with people in a slightly more passive way might be a good way to demonstrate that there's a place for that in future.
Okay, great, thank you. Gerhard, I'll come to you first for Christopher's question.
Well, of course, with a few people it doesn't work. If the farmer has a problem, he calls, you have to be out as fast as possible. So we developed a system of local beaver consultants. It's a 1-week training, and then they're working for the local agencies as volunteers. As volunteer, you're not working for government directly, so you have no problems with working on the weekends. You have no problems with working in the evening. And you have no working to apply for a permit to drive your car on Saturdays. So you go out, and the other thing, a lot of farmers are not 100% farmers, they're side to side. They're working and doing the farming job in the evening, in the weekends. And we got now around 500 of the local consultants, and it works rather well because they come out very, very fast. The farmers, the people who got a problem, they see, okay, there is somebody who wants to help me. Maybe the help doesn't work immediately or is not very happy, but he sees I'm not alone. And that's what I would recommend, because I can forecast you're going to have a spread of the beaver population. You're going to have more beavers and you're going to have more problems with beavers, and you need somebody who takes care of the problems and helps the people. Whether it's now organized by an NGO, by the Wildlife Trust or whatever, that's a question how you do it. It's also differently organized in different areas of Germany, depending on the size and number of beavers and. But in general, it's the same. You got somebody who has time to go out and act as fast as possible.
And Angelika, what's our thinking in the Wildlife Trust about the role we can play there and perhaps not play?
So I think the Wildlife Trust is really trying to take a very active role at the moment, and we have quite a few beaver managers or beaver officers, and this is going to be quite expensive to start with, but what we really think is that...
You noticed she looked at me when she said
yes.
that.
I smiled at you.
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to do is get it on the right footing. One of the reasons as well is that it's a big first species that we're reintroducing, so we want to do it well. And so maybe you might think, 2 beaver officers for that, that number of beavers. But we need to get the know-how, we need to do it well, and we need to have people on the phone to start with. What we find the Devon Wildlife Trust says is that the first 2 or 3 years of beaver presence, they get a lot of phone calls, and then landowners become quite good at dealing with it itself. There are also different trainings, beaver mitigation training. One is the class 52. Anyone can do that, and you learn how to remove dams in the first 2 weeks and so on. So all the skills you need to start with. And so I think there's a good structure to help people.
Great, thank you. Richard, we had a couple of questions there that talked about the tree issue, and you, in your talk, you were talking about how that was an issue for you earlier. What's your response to these concerns, particularly about where trees are being grown for commercial purposes?
Sure, and really good question, and it's a question that came to our mind almost immediately when the beavers arrived. But I do think we need to be very careful about talking too much about conflict and setting up beavers versus farming, because our experience has not been that whatsoever. Now, we have about 8 acres of fruit orchard, quite a lot of which is within the 20 to 30 metres that beavers will often forage from a waterway. And those orchards are grazed and browsed by pigs, by sheep and by cattle. And each of those trees has a tree guard, and we've managed to get them paid either through countryside stewardship or through various other schemes. The beavers are just another browse risk that we need to manage. It's as simple as that. And if you think about farmers, there is a danger we infantilise farmers in this country, and we think we need an expert to come and tell them how to behave. I've been a soldier, and I've been a corporate lawyer in my life. Of all the cohorts of people I've ever met, farmers... I can only speak for the UK. It's the background I know. Work in the most dangerous profession. They work the longest hours, and they are above all the most resilient. And there's nothing a beaver can do to a farmer that they will not manage, given the right tools, and crucially, the right money. So society needs to put its money where its mouth is. Beavers deliver huge societal benefits to this country, but landowners need legitimate recompense where they suffer direct loss. And they need help to prepare for beavers and to protect for beavers, and ideally to build riparian corridors up and down the length and breadth of this country.
Very good. We're almost out of time. And can I just say, are there any other bursting questions? All right. I'm gonna pick a favourite here because I think it will have wide implications. A lady at the end of that row there who... if you say who you are, and people might realise why I've picked you.
Yes, I'm Helen Watson. I work for The Guardian.
Okay.
My question is, so DEFRA announced the beaver licences to much hoo-ha a few months ago, but only I think one has been granted. That's Hilary's licence. How do you think it's going, Craig? How do you think, is it a bit too slow and bureaucratic, it sounds like? And is there a fear that people are just going to take matters into their own hands and release beavers around without getting permission if it's too difficult to get?
I'm not supposed to put the questions to the chair. I will answer you in my summing up, but Hilary, how about, should we all just come to each person here, have a final summing up of any kind of want to say in closing?
Yeah, so of course this tent is full of people who desperately want this to happen more quickly. I think DEFRA understand that. I actually do think it will start moving as we build confidence and the enthusiasm is demonstrated and public support is demonstrated. I think it will speed up. But yes, of course, it's frustrating. I would say I think it's better to go with the flow of that because I think it will be more sustainable. I would completely endorse what you've said. We need to build the conditions in which there will be the financial incentives for farmers to support this, that there will be the conditions for the public to really get behind it. And I'm afraid I'm unapologetic about the ferry thing, by the way, because I do think that we need the public to get behind this as well, and the public need to support this, whether that's a National Trust, a Wildlife Trust, whatever. We need public support and engagement in it. But yes, I want to see it speed up just like everybody else.
Gerhard, final thoughts?
Well, we know what the beaver does, and there are lots of people who know how to help. So don't reinvent the wheel. I very often see people doing things that's been done for 20 years and think it's new. No, look what the others do and do it yourself. It works, it's cheaper. And the other thing what I would wish, I don't know how it's here in the UK, but I would like in Germany, in Bavaria, that the government, the state, is offering more money. If you have a set-aside where the beaver can work, where the beaver can do his job for biodiversity, where the beaver can do for flooding protection, for water retention, then the government should be willing to pay you compensation and not say, okay, it's your property, you have to do it. And it would be rather cheap to pay the farmers to have areas for water retention, for flooding prevention, instead of giving subsidies to producing corn on the last square meters, and then it's thrown away because nobody wants to need it. Just the farmer has to make a living out of the land, and we should pay him so he can make the living, but we should pay him the money that benefits us all.
Great, Gerhard, thank you very much. Angelika?
I think the Wildlife Trust and also the National Trust, we have quite a lot of really trained, experienced people. I think we've submitted very good EOIs, and I think there has to be a meaningful move from the government to release numbers of beavers into areas that are well researched, that have had stakeholder involvement, and not just pittance. I really think we need to get moving. We also don't want to spend all our time and money jumping through loops. We want to spend our money on the beavers, on the farming, on the learning about them. Yeah, so I really think this is a great opportunity. Open the door in a meaningful way.
Thank you. And Richard?
So we're not trying to reintroduce the wolf to lowland England. This is beavers. And beavers and farmers, by and large, have far more in common than they have separating them. So please don't fret, don't worry if you're a landowner, it will be fine.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Helena, to your question, I'll say a few things. What I think is definitely the case is I think it took far, far, far too long for England to get to the place where it got to earlier this year, and for us eventually to agree that we can have licensed releases of beavers. I mean, that should have happened ages ago. You know, if we follow the science and evidence on this, on policy making, you know, it should have happened a long time ago. The fact that the government's now decided that, I very much agree with Hilary. What we want to do is take people with us. We kind of, I want it to happen as fast as possible, but at the same time, I don't want us to rush it and get it wrong. So I think getting that right is important. There is, of course, a frustration, not least amongst wildlife trusts, that sometimes doing these applications involves writing the equivalent of a PhD. I mean, literally, some of these applications are 90, 100,000 words. It's the equivalent of a PhD. It's quite extraordinary. And I think what we need to do is be really careful and get it right for the first few. Can maybe just put up with it for a little bit as we move on this. But if we're still having to do that in 5 years' time, that is ridiculous. So it's funny, isn't it, how there are some parts of the political spectrum that bang on all the time about deregulation and for actually environmental protections we need to keep, and yet actually sometimes we have extraordinary regulations that are put on us on the business of nature recovery at times and hold us back on nature recovery, and we need to look at that. Look, at the end of the day, I'm also with Hilary, I'm afraid. I want to be unapologetic about starting with the furry thing, and I'll tell you why, because actually, certainly from our point of view at the Wildlife Trust, for 10, 15 years talking about beavers, 99% of the time we've talked about their role in ecosystems and their importance for nature recovery, and we've talked about their function and how important that is. I don't think it's wrong for us 1% of the time to talk about how intrinsically beautiful they are and how wonderful they are, and that we should celebrate our intrinsic love of nature, when 99% of the time we talk about the other thing as well. And honestly, sitting here as chair this afternoon, it's been, what's really stood out for me is looking at a packed tent where everyone is smiling, just thinking about beavers and talking about the issue. So we should celebrate that, you know, people are really excited about the return of this native animal to Britain. But what it does highlight, this whole discussion, is actually what we need to do in Britain. It's not just learn to live with beavers. Actually, we need to learn, again, how to coexist with wildlife. You know, it is ridiculous that we've become a country that is almost scared sometimes of beavers, or scared of thinking about returning lynx, which we, you know, at the same time has got massive overpopulation of deer, and yet as a country we seem terrified of introducing the very predators that would help control that, be it lynx or wolves. We've got to learn to coexist with nature again, and the fact that as a country we've forgotten how to coexist with nature is perhaps the most telling aspect of how disconnected we've become from nature after hundreds of years of not having the full range of species here in Britain that perhaps we should have done. So I very much hope you've enjoyed this panel discussion this afternoon. Please give a huge round of applause to this brilliant panel. Thank you so much for joining us in the Wildlife Trust tent at Groundswell this afternoon. Join us over the next couple of days. We've got many more brilliant panels coming up.